Okay, we are continuing our discussion of process costing. I have access to the PowerPoints. This is PowerPoint slides 14 through 20, or all of these questions will be covered within that slide range. All right, so true, false, it says, once equivalent units are calculated for materials, this number will also be used for direct labor and factory overhead. And direct labor and factory overhead are known as conversion costs. And while this could happen, this is not usually what will happen. Okay, materials, at least in our examples, are usually going to be added at the beginning of the process, and direct labor and factory overhead are going to be applied are going to be incurred and applied throughout the process. So this is almost always going to be a false statement. Okay, let's see what else we have. Looks like we have another true-false question related to equivalent units. Right up here, it says, equivalent units should be computed separately for direct materials and conversion costs. We really just kind of covered that in the very last question. We said that we would, if we compute, in the previous question, we said it's a false statement that after we compute equivalent units for direct materials, that we would use the same number for conversion costs being direct labor and applied overhead. Okay, so we said that we would not do that. Well, now we're saying we should compute them separately? Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. All right, so now we need to be careful. In the previous video, we looked at, we had some questions about, determine the total number of units to be assigned cost. Well, very, very easy. That's step one in our process. So let's see what we have here, what they want to know. So this is the actual kind of, question. It doesn't actually, there's no question mark, but it says the number of equivalent units of production for material costs for the period was what? Okay. So let's just see what we have here. It says Department A had 5,000 units in work in process that were 60% completed as to labor and overhead at the beginning of the period. All right. 34,000 units of direct materials were added during the period. 31,000 units were completed during the period, and 2,000 units were 80% completed as to labor and overhead at the end of the period. All materials are added at the beginning of the first in, first out method is used to cost inventories. All right. The number of equivalent units of production for materials cost for the period was, so they're not looking for a dollar figure here. They just want to know how many equivalent units do we have for materials for the period, not in full. 34,000 units were added during the period. No, I can't draw a straight line to save my life. All right. So 34,000. Guess what? That's your answer. These 5,000 units were complete as to materials in a different period. Okay? So we don't really care about those 5,000. We don't care about ending inventory, because any inventory in process is still going to be 100% complete as to materials. So the only thing, and because we're only asking about for this period, all we have to do is look at the number of units that were started in the period and just pull that number, and that's going to be our answer. And that's all there is to it. It really is that simple. This time. Well, well, well. Look at what we have here. This looks like the exact same scenario with the exception of one word, and that word is conversion. Actually, two words. Conversion costs. So everything's the same. So they want to know the number of equivalent units of production for conversion costs for the period was. Well, we have to do this a whole lot differently than what we looked at in the prior example. Okay, the number of equivalent units of production for conversion costs. So the first thing that we want to look at is we want, okay, well, how many units were fully completed in the period? And they give us that information. They gave it to us in the last question. It's just that it didn't mean anything. And it says 31,000 units were completed during the period. So this is going to be our starting point, 31,000 units. Okay. However, do note, remember what we talked about. These 5,000 units right here that were in work in process are a part of this 31,000. Okay. However, we're asking about conversion costs now. So, as to conversion cost, let's bring our little calculator over here. As to conversion costs, 5,000 times 60% is 3,000. So we're going to have to subtract this 3,000 out. Okay, because of these 5,000, we essentially did the equivalent of 2,000 units of work for conversion costs. Why? Because they were already 60% complete in the first place. Okay, so 3,000 equivalent units were already done. And if we wanted to, we could take 40% times 5,000. And this 2,000 is the amount that we actually completed in the period, and it's already part of this 31,000 here. Okay? But 31,000 minus the portion of conversion costs that were completed in the prior period. All right. And it says, and 2,000 units were 80% completed as to labor and overhead at the end of the period. Well, we better know by now, hopefully, that labor and overhead are conversion costs. So we're going to take this 2,000 and multiply it by this 80%, and that's 1,600, but we're going to add that. Okay, so we've already got this 1,600 on our calculator, plus 31,000 minus 3,000 equals 29,600 units. So you can see, because materials are added at the beginning of the process and conversion costs are added throughout, we end up with two very, very different numbers for these questions. All right, let's see what we have here. Let's see here. It says, okay, Penny Incorporated employs a process costing system. Where am I at? I'm right here. Direct materials are added at the beginning of the process. There's information about July's activities. Using the FIFO method, the number of equivalent units of conversion cost was. Okay. So basically the exact same question that we had before, just with different numbers. Okay. So conversion cost. Now let's see here. Now they've done this a little bit differently, because if we recall, let's see here. I just want to see about that previous question. Notice that in this previous question here it says 31,000 units were completed during the period. Okay, that means started and completed, or well, it means that they were completed regardless of when they were started. That's a better way to put it. But notice what it says here. it doesn't tell us the number of units that were completed at all. It tells us instead the number of units started. Number of units started. So we're going to use that number, but we have to do this a little bit differently. 15,000. So let me ask you this. How many units of these 15,000 that were started were not completed? Ending inventory of 1,600 units that are some percentage less than 100 complete. So all we have to do here is say that we started 15,000 units. There were 1,600 in the ending inventory, okay? And if we were to, I want to say that this number here is going to be 13,400. Now that's not our answer, but this is the number of units that were started and completed. All right. But that's not what the question asks for, is it? The question says the number of equivalent units of conversion costs was. Okay, that's what the question is. So 13,400 were started and completed. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that number. This is my number that was started and completed in the period. However, because we're looking at started and completed all within the period, we actually do have to go up and grab the portion of these 850 units. Yes, these 850 units in beginning inventory are assumed to have been completed, but they were not started and completed. Okay, so we're going to take 850 and we're going to multiply it not by 60%, but by 1 minus 60%, or 40%. And that's going to give us 340 units that were actually completed in the period from beginning inventory. So we're going to add that 340 units here. $340 units completed in period. Give me 1 second. Okay, and this is this 340 right here. All right. We also have to account for this 1,600 units here that are 40% complete. So all we have to do here is take 1,600 and multiply by 0.4, and that's going to give us 640. Okay, so we're saying that 1,600 units, 40% complete as to conversion cost, is equal to 640 full units as to conversion cost. 40% of 1,600 is 640. So we've already got our 640, so I'm going to add to that. Okay, so all we have to do is add these figures up. Let's see what we got here. 13,400 plus 340 plus 640. And this is